He was the cold duke, a man made of marble and duty, who secured his family's future with a single transactional vow. She was the merchant's daughter, a bride purchased for her weight in gold, who naively hoped for love. But at the glittering Lancaster House ball, the facade finally shattered. When the Duke's calculating eyes scanned the ballroom, they landed on a sight that stopped his heart. His new Duchess, her face a mask of agony, fleeing the grand hall in a flood of tears. The cold Duke froze, and for the first time he felt something other than duty. He felt terror. Alistair Vane, Tempest, the 9th Duke of Ravenswood, was not a man given to warmth. Warmth was a luxury, and Ravenswood, his ancestral seat, his dynasty, his crushing burden, was teetering on the precipice of ruin. The Vane Tempest line, which had advised kings and commanded armies, was now one bad harvest away from insolvency. This was a secret Alistair guarded with a chilling ferocity. It was this secret that had led him to the only logical, agonizing solution: marriage. Not to a woman of his own station, for they were all as impoverished as he, but to the daughter of a merchant, Elara Vance. Their marriage, 3 months old, was as cold and cavernous as the north wing of Ravenswood Keep. Alistair had been correct. He had not been unkind, but correct was its own form of cruelty. He provided her with a duchess's allowance quarters and title. In return, her father, Silas Vance, a shipping magnate with more gold than half the peerage combined, had transferred a dowry so vast it had stopped the hemorrhaging of the Ravenswood accounts. Alistair now spent his days locked in the estate office, with his ledgers moving Elara's money like a general moving troops, plugging debts that his grandfather, a notorious gambler, had incurred. He barely saw his new wife. When he did, he saw a girl playing at being a duchess. She was too soft, her eyes too bright, her conversation too earnest. She spoke of improvements to the tenant cottages, of investing in new glass for the derelict orangery. He would nod, murmur a non-committal, "We shall see," and retreat. He mistook her earnestness for naivety. He was wrong. Elara, for her part, was suffocating. She had known this was an arranged match, but she was a creature of optimism. She had seen the Duke at their betrothal dinner, tall, severe, with eyes the colour of a winter storm, and had felt a foolish flutter. She believed his coldness was a shell, one that her warmth could eventually penetrate. She was also wrong. Every attempt she made was met with polite, impenetrable ice. She was the mistress of a house that felt like a museum, married to a man who felt like a statue. The servants were respectful but distant, taking their cues from their master. She was alone, and the dowry that had bought her this title felt like the stones in her pocket dragging her under. The invitation arrived on a crisp October morning. The Duchess of Abernathy's annual summer ball, delayed this year, was the pinnacle of the London season. It was to be held at the magnificent Lancaster House, a stone's throw from St. James's Palace. "We will attend," Alistair announced over a silent breakfast, his eyes not leaving the Times. Elara's heart leapt. London, a ball, perhaps away from the oppressive weight of Ravenswood and its damned ledgers, he might finally see her. "That sounds wonderful, Alistair." "It is necessary," he corrected, folding the paper with a sharp snap. "We have not been seen in town since the wedding. The ton whispers. We must present a united front." The hope guttered, leaving the familiar taste of ash. It was not a request or a romantic gesture. It was a command, a performance. Still, as she commissioned a new gown, a breathtaking creation of midnight blue silk and silver embroidery from a rising Bond Street modiste. A sliver of that foolish optimism returned. She would look the part. She would be poised, elegant, a duchess he could be proud of. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would look at her the way a husband looked at his wife instead of the way a man looks at a particularly favorable balance sheet. Lancaster House was a supernova of light and sound. Its gilded halls, inspired by the Palace of Versailles, were overflowing with the cream of English society. Diamonds glittered like trapped stars, the swell of the orchestra a physical force, and the scent of hothouse flowers and expensive French perfume hung heavy in the air. Alistair was magnificent. In his stark black evening wear, the dark blue riband of his order across his chest, he was the very picture of aristocratic power. He navigated the ballroom with an ease that Elara envied his cold courtesy a weapon. He was greeted with deference, his name spoken with respect. Ravenswood. Elara on his arm felt like a fraud. Her gown was exquisite, her Vance jewels substantial, but she lacked the one thing every other woman in the room possessed: the effortless, bone-deep arrogance of inherited belonging. She was new. Alistair, true to his word, presented their united front. He procured her a glass of champagne, introduced her to the wizened Duke of Abernathy, and even danced the opening waltz. But it was a performance. His hand on her waist was correct, his touch light, his eyes scanning the room over her shoulder. As the final chord sounded, he gave her a stiff bow and a clipped duchess, before being drawn into a conversation about parliamentary reform with Lord Pembroke. He left her. Not physically abandoned, that would be a scandal, but adrift. She was deposited on a small velvet-upholstered chair near a potted palm, where she became a target for the curious. The introductions were a blur of titled ladies with saccharine smiles and assessing eyes. They wanted to see the merchant's daughter who had bagged the cold duke. Elara handled them with polite grace, discussing the weather, the music, the marvel of the new gas lighting. But she felt their judgment, their silent calculation of her dowry. She needed air. Excusing herself, she slipped through a set of French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking the gardens. The cool night air was a relief. She leaned against the balustrade, the music a dull throb behind her. "I imagine this is all rather overwhelming for you." Elara turned. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway, a flute of champagne in her hand. She was devastatingly beautiful, with raven-black hair and eyes that glittered with a sharp, unkind intelligence. Elara recognized her instantly. Lady Beatrix Granville, daughter of the Earl of Stanhope. "Lady Beatrix," Elara murmured, curtsying slightly. "It is a lovely ball." Beatrix glided onto the terrace, her emerald green gown shimmering. "Don't be polite, dear. It doesn't suit you. You look like a frightened little mouse in a lion's den. But then I suppose that's what you are." Elara stiffened. "I'm not sure I understand your meaning." Beatrix gave a low, musical laugh. "Of course you don't. You understand ships and ledgers and trade. You don't understand us. You don't understand him." A cold dread, sharper than the night air, settled in Elara's stomach. "Him, Alistair," Beatrix said, savouring the name. "My Alistair." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Did you truly believe you were the first woman he asked to be his duchess?" Elara's blood ran cold. "Oh goodness, you did!" Beatrix scoffed, her mask of civility dropping away to reveal raw, venomous contempt. "How utterly adorable! Alistair and I were to be married. We had been promised to each other since we were children. He adored me." But there was a problem. My family, the Stanhopes, have blood but no gold. And Alistair, well, the great Duke of Ravenswood, was drowning in his grandfather's debts. She tapped a long finger against Elara's arm. He needed money. Your money. He came to me in tears, imagine that the cold Duke in tears, and explained his predicament. He had to save Ravenswood. And I, because I love him, I told him to do it. Marry the little merchant girl, I told him. Secure your legacy, and when you have her money, I will be waiting. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering Elara's fragile hope. He doesn't love you, Beatrix hissed, her beautiful face contorted with triumph. He doesn't even like you. He tolerates you. You are the fatted calf he slaughtered to save his ancestral home. You are collateral. And every night he spends in your common bed, he is thinking of me. Elara couldn't breathe. The orchestra swelled a joyous sound that mocked her agony. She looked past Beatrix through the doors across the glittering expanse of the ballroom. She saw him. Alistair. He was standing with Lord Pembroke and another man, and he was laughing. It was a small, curt laugh, but it was genuine. He looked relaxed, powerful at home. He hadn't thought of her. He hadn't wondered where she was. He had secured his prize, parked her like a carriage, and returned to his real life. He was laughing while her entire world had just been burned to the ground. The sound that escaped Elara's throat was a choked, wounded gasp. She couldn't be here. She couldn't breathe this perfumed air, couldn't look at these smiling, predatory faces. "Oh dear," Beatrix whispered, feigning concern. "Have I said too much?" Elara shoved past her. She didn't walk, she ran. She pushed through the crowded doorway, ignoring the startled look of a dowager. She heard someone call her name, "Your Grace," but she didn't stop. She fled across the marble floor, her midnight blue silk, a blur, the silver embroidery catching the light like so many tears. She just had to get out. Alistair's laugh died in his throat. Lord Pembroke was in the middle of an anecdote about a disastrous fox hunt, but Alistair was no longer listening. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision, a disturbance in the placid sea of the Tun. He turned his head, and he froze. It was Elara, his wife. Her face, usually so composed and eager, was utterly ravaged. Her eyes were wide with a horror he had never seen, and tears streamed unheeded down her pale cheeks, leaving black streaks of coal in their wake. She was fleeing, her hands balled into fists at her side, shouldering past a viscount as if he were a footman. At the glittering ball, the cold Duke froze when he saw his bride fleeing in tears. His glass of champagne slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound was lost in the music, but to Alistair it was a cannon shot. The blood drained from his face. In that one horrific second, he didn't see a merchant girl or a solution. He saw his wife, and she was broken, and a terrifying, unfamiliar voice in his head whispered one word. "Beatrix." "Alistair." "Are you quite well?" Lord Pembroke asked. Alistair didn't answer. He was already moving his cold facade, shattered, pushing through the crowd with a ferocity that stunned those in his path. "Elara, Elara, wait!" She reached the grand foyer just as he cleared the ballroom. "Elara!" His voice was a bark, sharp with an emotion he couldn't name. Panic. Guilt. She didn't turn. The head footman, seeing the Duchess in such distress, had already signalled for the Ravenswood carriage. It was pulling up to the curb as she burst through the main doors, a sob tearing from her chest. "Your Grace, your wrap," the footman began. "Just open the door," she wept. She scrambled inside, collapsing onto the plush velvet seat just as Alistair reached the pavement. He was breathless. "Elara, what in God's name happened?" She stared at him, her face illuminated by the gaslight. It was a mask of such profound betrayal that he flinched. "Take me home," she whispered to the driver, her voice shaking. "Just home." "Elara, talk to me." Alistair climbed in opposite her, pulling the door shut with a heavy thud. The carriage lurched forward, plunging them into the relative darkness of the cab. "Home, Your Grace," the coachman called from his perch. Alistair's jaw was tight. "To Ravenswood House," he ordered, naming their London townhouse in Mayfair. The journey to the country estate was too long. This had to be dealt with now. The carriage rolled into the London traffic, and the silence began. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a suffocating, violent void, filled with the sound of Elara's hitched breathing as she tried and failed to control her sobs. She had curled into the corner, her face turned to the window, watching the streetlights of Piccadilly pass in a watery blur. Her magnificent gown was crushed, her hair coming undone. Alistair sat opposite her, rigid. His mind was racing. Beatrix. It had to be Beatrix. He had seen her on the terrace. What did she say? He knew, of course. He knew exactly what she would have said. She would have used the truth as a weapon. "Elara," he tried, his voice rough. "You must tell me what occurred." She turned her head slowly, her eyes red-rimmed and flashing with a new, terrifying emotion met his. "You," she choked out. "You occurred. That is not an answer. You made a scene. You embarrassed us both." The words came out colder than he intended, the familiar armor of his ducal pride snapping back into place. Elara's sob turned into a short, hysterical laugh that was more painful than any scream. "Embarrassed. Embarrassed you." "My apologies, Your Grace. I seem to have forgotten the terms of our transaction." She spat the word. Alistair recoiled as if struck. She knew. "I am a fool," she whispered, striking her own knee with her fist. "I am a naive, stupid little fool. I actually hoped." She dissolved again, not into quiet tears, but into a wrenching, full-bodied grief. Alistair was drowning. He had no tools for this. He could manage creditors, placate ministers, and command tenants. He could not manage this raw, exposed feminine pain. He had caused it, and he had no idea how to fix it. A part of him, the cold, practical part, wanted to rage at Beatrix for her recklessness. Another smaller part was transfixed by the sheer totality of Elara's devastation. He had broken her. He had taken her bright, earnest hope and smashed it on the floor of Lancaster House, right next to his champagne glass. "Elara," he said, and his own voice was unsteady. "Listen to me." "No, no more listening," she cried, sitting bolt upright. Her eyes were no longer grieving. They were burning. "I have listened to you. I have listened to your polite disinterest. I have listened to the servants whisper. I have listened to the silence of this mausoleum you call a marriage. And tonight I listened to Lady Beatrix. She was very informative." "Beatrix is a bitter, scorned woman," he said, grasping for a defense. "But she wasn't lying, was she?" Elara shot back. Alistair looked at her. He could not, would not lie about this. His silence was her answer. Ilara's face crumpled. She let out a long, shuddering sigh and seemed to shrink. The fight went out of her, leaving something hollow and terrifyingly cold. She said nothing else. She simply turned back to the window. The carriage clattered over cobblestones. Alistair could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic trapped bird. He had wanted a docile, wealthy bride. He had not considered the cost. He had not considered her. When they arrived at Ravenswood House, Ilara was out of the carriage before the footman could even set the step. She fled up the stairs, ignoring the concerned look of the butler, Mr. Thorn. "Your Grace," Thorn asked, as Alistair entered the black-and-white marble foyer. "See to the horses, Thorn. The Duchess is unwell. She is not to be disturbed." "Very good, Your Grace." Alistair stood alone in the foyer. He heard the distant sound of Ilara's bedroom door slamming shut, and more faintly the click of her lock. He walked into his study and poured a brandy. His hand was shaking. He downed it in one go, the fire in his throat, doing nothing to warm the ice in his gut. He had done this. He, Alistair Vane Tempest, who prided himself on honor and duty, had committed an act of profound calculated cruelty. He had destroyed an innocent woman for the sake of his name. He looked at his reflection in the dark window pane. The cold Duke stared back, and for the first time in his life, Alistair truly loathed the man he saw. Alistair did not sleep. He sat in his study until the first grey, watery light of dawn bled over the London rooftops, the brandy decanter significantly lighter. He fully expected the day to bring a hysterical, weeping wife demands to return to her father, or worse, a visit from Silas Vance himself, a man Alistair had no desire to face. What he did not expect was to be summoned. At 9:30, Thorn knocked. "Your Grace, the Duchess asks if you would be so good as to join her in the morning room. She says to tell you she has paperwork." Alistair frowned. Paperwork. He was baffled, and if he was honest, unnerved. He splashed cold water on his face, donned a fresh cravat, and smoothed his waistcoat. He felt as though he were walking to a duel. He found her standing by the window, not in a dressing gown, but fully dressed in a severe, practical day dress of dark blue wool. Her hair was not coiffed for calls, but pulled back in a tight, functional knot. Her eyes were swollen and red, but they were no longer tearful. They were dangerously, terrifyingly clear. And she was not alone. The entire morning room table was covered in papers. His papers. The Ravenswood ledgers, the tenant manifests, the loan agreements from Coutts Bank. "What is the meaning of this?" Alistair demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Those are my private papers." Ilara turned from the window. Her composure was chilling. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said, her voice flat. "Please sit. I've had coffee sent up." "I don't want coffee, Ilara. I want an explanation." "Very well." She walked to the table and tapped a thick, leather-bound book. "The explanation is this. I've spent the last 5 hours since approximately 4 o'clock this morning reviewing your estate's finances, and I must say, Alistair, I am astounded." He bristled. "You do not understand such things." "Don't I?" She held up a sheaf of papers. "This loan from Lord Pembroke, for instance. You've secured it against the spring wheat harvest at an interest rate of 12%, or 12. It's predatory. And this," she tapped another ledger, "your man in the north riding Mr. Elias Croft. His returns from the tenant rents are 20% lower than the returns from the east riding, despite having more arable land. He's either incompetent or he's stealing from you." Alistair was speechless. He stared at her, this woman he had dismissed as a soft, naive girl, who was now dissecting his ancestral finances with the precision of a surgeon. "My father," Elara continued, her voice gaining strength, "did not just give me money, Your Grace. He taught me how to manage it. I have been balancing the accounts for Vance shipping since I was 16. Your grandfather's debts are staggering, but it is your management that is truly catastrophic." She picked up a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table toward him. "So we have a new arrangement." He looked down. It was a fresh sheet of stationery, with a few lines written in her clear, bold hand. "You called our marriage a transaction last night," she said. "You were correct, but you misunderstood the terms. You believed you had purchased my dowry. You were wrong. You have merely taken it on as an investment that I will now manage." He read the lines. They were simple and utterly devastating to his pride. "I, Alistair, Duke of Ravenswood, do hereby grant full and unrestricted proxy over all financial and estate matters of the Ravenswood holdings to my wife Elara, Duchess of Ravenswood. She will have sole authority to hire and fire staff, negotiate loans, and manage all accounts. In return, she will endeavor to restore the estate to solvency." "This is absurd," he scoffed, but there was a tremor of fear in his voice. "I will sign no such thing." "Oh, you will," Elara said, her voice devoid of heat. "You have two choices. You sign that paper, and I will save your family. I will save Ravenswood. I will untangle this mess. I will fire Matul Mr. Croft. I will renegotiate with Pembroke, who I assure you will be far more pliable when I threaten to move all of Vance Shipping's accounts from his bank, and in 5 years you will be solvent. In public, I will be the perfect smiling Duchess. We will be the united front you so desire. No one will ever know." "And my second choice?" he asked, his voice low. "Your second choice," Elara said, walking to the door, "is that I will leave. I will go home to my father. And when he asks me why, I will tell him. I will tell him, you are a profligate, incompetent fool who married me under false pretenses and allowed your cast-off mistress to humiliate me. I will tell him you are drowning in debts you are too proud and too stupid to manage. The Vance dowry will of course be immediately withdrawn. The mortgages will be called in. Cootes Bank will foreclose. Your tenantry will be on the parish. You will be ruined by Christmas. And all of London from the Queen down to the lowest gutter snipe will know why." She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "The choice is yours, Your Grace. The pen is on the table." Alistair looked at the paper. He looked at her. The woman standing before him was not the girl he'd married. This was a Titan. She was her father's daughter. She was terrifying. And she was, he realized with a sickening jolt, his only hope. He had never felt so cornered in his life. He was trapped by his own pride, his own lies, and his own profound incompetence. The cold Duke had been checkmated. Slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat, Alistair Vane Tempest walked to the table. He picked up the pen, dipped it in the inkwell, and with a shaky hand signed his name. He had just ceded control of his entire life to the woman he had scorned. Elara took the paper, her face unreadable. She blew on the ink to dry it. "Excellent," she said, her voice crisp. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to draft a letter to Mr. Croft. He's to be dismissed by sundown. I'll also require the carriage. I am meeting with the board at Cootes Bank before lunch." She left him alone in the room, surrounded by the evidence of his failure. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been rooted. The next 6 months were a revolution. Elara moved her personal office from the small feminine morning room to the grand, imposing estate office, his office. Alistair was relegated to the secondary study, a room he had always hated. At first he watched her with a mixture of resentment and morbid fascination. He was a prisoner in his own home, sidelined while his wife, his merchant wife, tore through generations of aristocratic mismanagement like a cleansing fire. She was relentless. She was at her desk before dawn and often worked late into the night, poring over maps and figures. She did in fact fire Elias Croft. The man had blustered and threatened invoking the Duke's name only for Elara to calmly produce the signed proxy. He left ashen-faced. She travelled to the north riding herself, not in a duchess's carriage, but on horseback, which shocked the tenants. She met with them, listened to their complaints about Croft's extortionate rents, and reviewed the state of their cottages. She returned to Ravenswood Keep, covered in mud, exhausted, and immediately drew up plans for a new drainage system for the lower fields and a fund to repair the tenants' roofs, to be paid for by selling a redundant parcel of land near the Scottish border. Alistair, with nothing else to do, found himself following her. He'd ride out to inspect the fences and find her deep in conversation with his farm manager, Mr. MacLeod, a grim Scotsman who had never shown Alistair anything but terse respect. MacLeod, however, looked at the new Duchess with something bordering on awe. Her Grace has a fine mind for agriculture. Your Grace, MacLeod told him one afternoon. She suggests we rotate the crops, introduce clover to replenish the soil. It's what my grandfather used to do. It's a good plan. Alistair felt a strange, unfamiliar pang. It wasn't just resentment. It was admiration. He began to attend her meetings, sitting in the corner of the office ostensibly to observe. In truth, he was learning. He watched her negotiate with a timber merchant, her numbers sharp, her demeanor firm but fair. She got a price 20% better than he ever had. You should have asked for 30, he commented gruffly after the merchant left. Elara didn't look up from her notes. 20 is a fair price. He makes a profit, we get our timber, and he will be eager to do business with us again. We are building a reputation for reliability, Your Grace, not extortion. It's a long-term strategy. He had no reply to that. The Cold War between them began to thaw, not into warmth, but into a tentative détente. Their dinners were no longer silent. They discussed the estate. The wool prices are down, he would offer. They are, she'd reply. But I've found a buyer in France for the raw fleece, bypassing the London merchants. It's a risk, but the margin is higher. I need your signature on the export license. He was by necessity involved. He was still the Duke. His name was required. But he was no longer the commander. He was the consultant. And he found, to his shock, that he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the strategy. He enjoyed her. He began to see the woman he had married. He saw her quick wit when she dismissed a fawning local vicar. He saw her kindness when she sat with the aging housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, going over the household linens. He saw her strength when a letter arrived from Lady Beatrix Granville, which Elara read her face impassive before calmly dropping it into the fireplace, unread by him. What did it say? He asked, his voice tight. I have no idea, Elara replied, brushing soot from her fingers. I imagine it was vitriolic, desperate, and badly spelled. It's of no consequence. One rainy evening, he found her asleep in the office, her head pillowed on a massive ledger labelled Debt Consolidation. A stray curl had escaped her severe bun, softening the line of her cheek. She looked exhausted, vulnerable. He felt a powerful, complex emotion well up in his chest. It was more than admiration. It was a fierce, protective tenderness that terrified him. He gently removed his own coat from the hook and draped it over her shoulders. She stirred, blinking up at him, her eyes drowsy and unguarded. "Alistair," she murmured, her voice soft with sleep. "You're exhausted, Alara. Go to bed." She nodded, pulling his coat tighter around her. "The Coots loan is restructured," she mumbled. We saved 2 points. We're going to be all right." She was including him. We. He stood there watching her and realized the devastating truth. He had married her for her gold, a transaction that had shamed him. But in the ashes of that shame, he had found a woman of iron and intellect, a woman who had saved him from himself. Alistair Vane Tempest, the cold Duke, was hopelessly, irrevocably in love with his wife. By the following spring, Ravenswood was a different place. The air of decay was gone, replaced by the sounds of industry. Roofs were being rethatched, the orangery was being reglazed, and the tenantry, for the first time in a generation, had paid their rents without a hint of protest. Alara had instituted a fair rent system based on yield, and it had made her wildly popular. The ton was abuzz. The Ravenswoods, who had been rumoured to be on the brink, were suddenly miraculously solvent. The new Duchess, initially dismissed as a quiet merchant mouse, was now spoken of with a new respect. She was the Iron Duchess, a financial wizard who had single-handedly restored the Vane Tempest fortune, and Alistair was a changed man. The coldness had receded, replaced by a quiet, watchful pride. He was seen at her side constantly, not as a guardian, but as a partner. He deferred to her in conversations about finance, his pride in her evident. The Ton, who loved nothing more than a powerful, inscrutable couple, was captivated. Theirs was becoming the most unlikely and most talked-about love story of the season. But a story this good was bound to have a villain. Lady Beatrix Granville had spent the last 6 months in a self-imposed exile at her father's crumbling country estate, nursing her wounded pride. She had expected Alara to flee Alistair, to be ruined, and for him to eventually somehow come to her. Instead, the little merchant girl had become the toast of London. Beatrix's humiliation was total. Her one-time friends now whispered about her desperate attempt to hold on to a man who had clearly moved on. Her spite curdled into a toxic, obsessive hatred. She couldn't attack Alara's wealth. Alara was now wealthier than ever. She couldn't attack her success. Alara's success was the talk of the town. Beatrix needed a new weapon. Not one of finance, but one of blood. She began to dig. She used what little money she had to hire a man, a disgraced former clerk from Doctors' Commons, to investigate the origins of the Vance fortune. She assumed she would find smuggling or perhaps war profiteering. What he found was so much better. Silas Vance Alara's father was a self-made man, but the story of his marriage was a carefully constructed lie. His first wife, a common-law match from his days as a poor dock worker, had not died of fever, as the official story went. She had run off to America. Silas, ambitious and eager to climb, had simply declared her dead, and years later married Alara's mother, the daughter of a respectable shipbuilder. The problem was the first wife, a woman named Mary Ann, had only died 3 years ago in Boston. When Silas Vance married Alara's mother, he was still a married man. His second marriage was a sham, and Alara, the brilliant, powerful Duchess of Ravenswood, was a bastard. Beatrix held the proof, a copy of the first marriage certificate from St. Dunstan's in Stepney, and a certified death certificate from Boston, dated 1835. It was perfect. In the world of the aristocracy, finance was one thing. Blood was everything. A bastard could not hold the title of Duchess. The scandal would not just ruin Elara, it would annul the marriage. The dowry would have to be returned. Alistair would be destroyed finally and completely, and he would have no one to blame but the illegitimate commoner he had chosen over her. She planned her attack with meticulous care. Elara and Alistair were hosting a grand ball at Ravenswood Keep to celebrate its restoration. It was to be the event of the season, and it would be Elara's final night as Duchess. The Ravenswood ball was a triumph. The great hall, which had been dark and draped in dust covers for 3 months, was ablaze with thousands of candles. The restored portraits of Alistair's ancestors looked down on a scene of vibrant modern prosperity. The scent of beeswax and fresh roses filled the air. Elara stood at the top of the grand staircase, Alistair at her side. She was radiant in a gown of ivory satin, her family's pearls at her throat. She looked every inch the Duchess. Alistair leaned in his voice for her ears only. "You did this, Elara. You saved this house." "No," she murmured, placing her hand on his arm. "We saved it." He covered her hand with his thumb stroking her skin. It was a simple public gesture of affection that spoke volumes. The cold Duke was a memory. The orchestra began the first waltz. Alistair led his wife to the floor. As they moved together, they were the undeniable center of the room, a portrait of power and most shockingly of love. They were so lost in each other that they did not see the late arrival. Lady Beatrix Granville swept into the hall, uninvited, her face a mask of triumphant malice. She was dressed in a garish shade of crimson, a stark, bloody slash in the sea of pastels. The music came to a halt as she strode into the middle of the dance floor. "A truly touching display," she announced, her voice ringing with sarcasm. The room fell silent. Alistair moved to stand slightly in front of Elara. "Beatrix," he said, his voice a low growl, "you are not welcome here. Leave." "Oh, I couldn't possibly leave," Beatrix sneered, "not before offering my congratulations to the pretender." She turned her venomous gaze on Elara. "You've played your part beautifully, Elara. The Iron Duchess. So strong. So clever. But you can't build a dynasty on a lie." "Beatrix, that is enough," Alistair warned. "Tell me, your grace," Beatrix continued, "what is your mother's name? Was it Anne Vance, or was it Mary Ann?" Elara's blood turned to ice. She knew the story her mother was Anne. She had never heard the name Mary Ann. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." Beatrix produced the papers from her reticule. "This is a marriage certificate from St. Dunstan's for a Silas Vance and a Mary Ann Pembroke. And this is a death certificate from Boston, Massachusetts. Mary Ann died 3 years ago. Your father was still married to her when he married your mother." She flung the papers at Elara's feet. They scattered on the polished floor. "Your mother was a mistress," Beatrix shrieked, her control finally snapping. "Your parents' marriage was a fraud. You Duchess are a bastard." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a bomb, a social apocalypse. Every eye was on Elara, who was pale as death, her hand frozen in the air. This she had not known. This was a secret her father had kept. She looked at the papers, then at the faces of the ton, shocked, intrigued, and in some victorious. She looked at Alistair. This was the ultimate test. His pride, his name, his bloodline which he had married her to save. She had just tainted it. She was illegitimate. Their marriage was invalid. Their future children, bastards. She expected to see the old Alistair, the cold, calculating duke who had sold himself. She expected to see him freeze, to see the revulsion, the calculation, the retreat. Alistair looked at the papers on the floor. He looked at Beatrix, her chest heaving, her eyes alight with mad triumph. Then he looked at Alara. He saw the terror in her eyes, the shame, the plea. He did not freeze. He did not retreat. He moved. He slowly and deliberately turned his back on Beatrix. He stepped toward Alara, and in front of the silent, watching aristocracy, he took her hand. He brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles with a devotion that was almost reverent. Then, still holding her hand, he turned back to Beatrix. His face was not cold. It was hot, with a white-hot, lethal rage. "Lady Beatrix," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the hall. "Your desperation is as pathetic as your research." Beatrix gaped. "But it's true, the marriage is invalid." I am aware of my wife's history." Alistair lied, his voice like steel. "I have always been aware. We spoke of it before our marriage." A collective gasp went through the room. Alara stared at him, her heart stopping. "You see," Alistair continued, pulling Alara securely to his side. "Unlike you, Lady Beatrix, I do not value a person by the purity of their blood, but by the content of their character. I married Alara not for her name, but for her mind, for her strength, for a brilliance you could not possibly comprehend." He took a step toward Beatrix, who recoiled. "She is the Duchess of Ravenswood. She is my wife by church law, and by my own choice. She is the mother of my future heirs, and she has more honor and integrity in her little finger than the entire Stanhope line has had in a century." He pointed to the door. "You have slandered my Duchess in my home. You are a disgrace to your name. Get out. And if you ever speak her name again, I will personally see to it that your father's creditors, every last one of whom I now hold the notes for, rain down upon him and destroy him. Am I clear?" Beatrix was shaking. She was ruined. He hadn't just defended Alara. He had used the very power Alara had given him to protect her. He had chosen his common bastard wife over his entire world. Lady Beatrix Granville turned, and for the second time in a year, a woman fled a ballroom in humiliation. This time it was not Alara. The ball did not recover, but the war was won. The great hall was a cavern of stunned silence, broken only by the scrape of Beatrix's heels as she fled. Alistair, his arm locked around Alara's waist, like a steel band, did not watch her go. His eyes were fixed on his wife, searching her pale, shocked face. He felt the tremor that ran through her, a fine, violent shudder. He nodded to the stunned orchestra leader. "Music, please." The musicians, pale and unnerved, numbly began to play a hesitant quadrille. The sound was thin and grotesque in the charged atmosphere. Alistair turned to the Duke of Abernathy, his voice clear and carrying a perfect mask of ducal command. "My apologies for the interruption, Your Grace. A piece of unpleasant and sadly private family business. My wife is overtired. We will bid you good night. Please, I insist, enjoy Ravenswood's hospitality. Thorn will see to the champagne." He did not let go of her. He did not wait for a reply. He tucked her hand securely into the crook of his arm, placed his other hand on the small of her back, and turned them as one toward the grand staircase. Their walk was an eternity. Elara felt 1,000 eyes on her back, burning into her ivory gown. She could hear the explosion of whispers beginning a sibilant rushing sound like snakes in dry grass. She kept her eyes forward, her head high by sheer instinct, but she saw nothing. Her entire world had been reduced to the solid, unyielding presence of Alistair at her side, his body a shield, his pace steady and unhurried. He was not fleeing, he was escorting. He was claiming her in front of them all in the very moment of her deepest shame. They ascended the stairs. The servants they passed flattened themselves against the wall, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. Alistair simply nodded to them as if it were any other night. He walked her down the long ancestral gallery, past the portraits of vain Tempest duchesses, women of impeccable lineage and cold, painted eyes. I don't belong here, Elara thought, a wave of sickness rising in her throat. She was right. I am a pretender. They reached her chambers, the new spacious suite adjoining his that she had redecorated, a symbol of her control over the house. Alistair opened the door, guided her inside, and only released her to shut and lock it behind them. The heavy click of the bolt echoed in the sudden tomb-like silence of the room. Elara stood in the middle of the floor, her hands clenched at her sides, shaking so hard her pearls rattled. The music from the ballroom was a faint muffled throb, a world away. Elara! She turned to him. He was no longer the Duke. He had shed the public mask the moment the door was shut. His face was etched with a raw, fierce emotion she couldn't name. He looked undone. Was it true? She whispered the words, tearing at her throat. What she said? About my father. About my mother. Alistair looked at her, his storm-grey eyes unblinking. He didn't hesitate. I have no idea, he said, his voice rough. You lied to them, she choked out. Downstairs. You said you knew. You lied for me. No, he said, taking a step toward her. I did not lie. I told them I married you for your mind and your strength. I told them you had more honor than the entire Stanhope line. That was not a lie. It is the truest thing I have ever said in my life. But the rest, her composure finally broke. A sob tore from her, a sound of agony. My mother. She called my mother a mistress. She called me. She couldn't say the word. It doesn't matter. How can you say that? She cried, the injustice, the humiliation, the sudden, terrible doubt about her own father, all crashing down on her. It matters your name, Alistair, your bloodline. The one thing you married me to save, I've tainted it. If what she said is true, our marriage, our children, they would be ours. He interrupted, his voice a low, powerful growl. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. His grip was not cold. It was desperate grounding. Do you think I care for a piece of paper in a dusty parish registry? Do you think I give a damn about the gossip of fools who have never done an honest day's work in their lives? He shook her just slightly as if to wake her. Listen to me. I was raised to believe that name was everything. That blood was the only currency that mattered. I was a fool. A cold, proud, arrogant fool. His voice broke, and he swallowed his own vulnerability, a stunning, shocking revelation. I married you to save this house. That is the great shame of my life, Elara. Not your blood, but my action. I took you your warmth, your gold, your brilliance, and in return I gave you nothing. I gave you a title and a cold shoulder. I let my pride and my bitterness poison the best thing that ever happened to me." He dropped his hands from her shoulders only to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her tear-stained cheeks. "I have been in awe of you since the day you walked into my study with those ledgers. I watched you save this family, this house, these people. You saved me. You saved me from my own damn pride, from the prison of my father's expectations. You gave me a purpose beyond just surviving." "Alistair," she whispered, her hands coming up to rest on his wrists. She could feel the frantic pulse beating beneath his skin. "I have been in love with you for months," he confessed, his gaze burning into hers. "I was just too proud, too much of a coward to admit it. I watched you fall asleep over those damnable accounts, and I felt a love so fierce it terrified me. You are not a pretender, Elara. You are the heart of this house. You are Ravenswood. The name means nothing without you." Elara's breath hitched. She had dared to hope for respect. She had fought for partnership. She had never, not even in her most secret, foolish dreams, dared to hope for this. "But tonight," she whispered. "When she said it, I was so afraid. I looked at you and I thought I would see him again. The man from the Lancaster House ball. The cold Duke. The man who saw me only as a transaction." "He's gone, Elara," Alistair murmured, leaning his forehead against hers, his eyes closing. "You banished him. That man. He was a shell, an empty, cold thing. You filled this house with life, and you filled me with life. There is only Alistair, your husband, and I will spend the rest of my days earning the forgiveness you gave me, without my even asking. There is nothing to forgive." She wept, her fingers lacing behind his neck. "I was never a fool for hoping, was I?" "No, my love," he whispered back, his voice thick with an emotion he would never again hide. "I was the fool for not seeing." He kissed her. It was not the correct, chaste kiss of their wedding day, nor the polite peck of their united front. It was a kiss of absolute, desperate relief. It was a confession and a promise. A seal on a vow that had just been made in front of the entire world. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving and had just been offered a banquet. It was the kiss of a woman who had been freezing and had finally been brought into the warmth. He kissed away the shame of Beatrix's accusation, the chill of his own past, the bitter memory of their transactional beginning. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathless. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a merchant's daughter or a financial solution, or even as the Iron Duchess, but as Elara, his wife, his equal, his love. "To hell with the ball," he murmured, sweeping her into his arms. Elara laughed, a real watery laugh of pure joy, as he carried her toward the bedroom. The cold Duke was a memory, a story they would one day tell their children. In his place was a man who had finally learned that the greatest fortune he would ever possess was not his name nor his lands, but the love of the woman who had saved his life by first ruining and then brilliantly, fearlessly rebuilding his world. And so the cold Duke and the Iron Duchess sealed their new alliance not with a contract, but with a vow. Theirs was a love story forged not in a glittering ballroom, but in the dusty ledgers of a failing estate and proven in the crucible of public scandal. They learned that true power wasn't in a name or a bloodline, but in a partnership of equals. The Ton might have whispered, but they could not deny the Ravenswoods were a force to be reckoned with, their marriage the most powerful asset they owned. Thank you for listening to this complete story. If you were moved by Alara's strength and Alistair's redemption, please show your support. Like this video, share it with a friend who loves a story of twists and romance, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more long-form dramas, just like this one. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an ending. We'll see you in the next story.